Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Francis Shefter, Principal of Shefter Law. You can get more details and catch prior episodes at www.shefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Francis Shefter.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to our show. Welcome. Today's guest is Ned Johnson, who is the president and Tutor Geek of PrepMatters, which is an academic tutoring, educational planning, and test prep company in DC. Ned, what do you mean by Tutor Geek? Tell us a little bit about that.
That started years ago. I was invited to a business roundtable, all these business people, and everyone was like, CEO of this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, holy smokes, I'm just a tutor and I'm pretty geeky and I just kind of hang out with kids. And I decided long ago it was better to laugh at myself and sort of beat other people to the punch. So there we are.
So it came. I love it, and I know we were talking about some specific areas that I know that we both know that parents need help. And one of the things was control. And so, why is a sense of control so important for motivation and stress tolerance?
Yeah, so my writing partner is a guy named Bill Stichter. He's a clinical neuropsychologist, and he and I wrote a book that came out in 2018 called "The Self-Driven Child: The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives." And this came out of our experiences. We've been lecturing for a while about teen motivation, kind of looking at how do kids become intrinsically motivated. And somewhere along the line, Bill said, I feel like maybe we should write some of this stuff down. Maybe we should write a book about this. And he said, is there an organizing principle in your head about the advice that we give to kids and their parents? And so it seems to me like all the advice we're giving is trying to help kids feel just a greater sense of control about their lives. And so we kind of did a deep dive on this, and it turns out that a sense of control, and I'll talk about exactly what I mean by that in a moment, but that a sense of control is good for everything. I mean, it's good for academic success and career success. It's good for happiness and for longevity, right? I mean, if you have an elderly parent or grandparent who's in an assisted living facility and they have choices about what time do you eat, what time those young people from school who want to come visit you, do you want to this day or that day, morning or afternoon, people live longer. And it's because, I guess the second point about a sense of control, motivation, but also from a stress perspective, that a low sense of control is about the most stressful thing that a human nervous system can experience. And so the opposite of sense of control is feeling helpless or hopeless or powerless or overwhelmed or resigned to life that you don't like. And so, Bill is a clinical neuropsychologist, has been lecturing for 30 years about the effects of too much stress on developing brains. And so if we knew that this feeling a healthy sense of control was absolutely crucial to both intrinsic motivation of not just working hard, but kind of wanting to work hard and going after goals and building a life that I want to live, and just to a lower sense of stress and all the bad effects we all know, all the statistics on anxiety and depression, it sure seemed like this sense of control was a really important thing. And we talk about this really quickly in two domains. One is the subjective sense of autonomy, that this is my life. I have say over it. I get my parents' input, but I'm not just being told what to do all the time in every facet of my life. And the brain state that supports it, that when we're in our right mind, the prefrontal cortex with all those executive functions, right, runs the show, including regulating the amygdala, the stress system of our brain, so that when something bad happens, you don't freak or panic and just run away or avoid what might be worthy but kind of intense. Rather, the prefrontal cortex jumps into line and we cope, and it dampens down the stress response. So we want both of these things, a sense of control and the brain state that feels like I'm in control even when, or perhaps especially when, things are kind of hard.
It's so interesting you say that, because I think back to, my children are only 5 and 8. And I remember a couple of years ago, I was just having that battle of going to sleep and eating. And I remember their pediatrician said, those are the only things they have control over. And I took a step back and went, oh, because you can't force somebody to fall asleep and you can't force food down a kid's throat. And I'm like, that makes sense. And so like my thought process as a parent just totally changed.
Can I tell you about this? So I wrote years ago, I co-wrote a book about called Conquering the SAT. It was about stress and anxiety. And at the time, my daughter was 2. And we talked about this same idea, the sense of control and agency. And my wife had this sort of pitched battle with our then 2-year-old when she was trying to put her own pajamas on, right? And she's trying to pull the bottoms up over her pajamas, right? Well, she has this very big bottom. She's got a diaper on. Her arms aren't very long. And she's like, I can't see what's going on back there. And she's frustrated. And my wife, being a loving mom, was like, Katie, can I help you? She's like, I do it. And my wife, the more stress my daughter got by this isn't working well, the more my wife kept offering advice, which made my daughter just like apoplectic. I do it, right? And that sense of control, it's such a big deal. And you're right, we can't make people do other things against their will. We can make it so painful that they might agree to it, but that's really not the path that any of us as educators or as parents want to be, particularly with our children and really with anyone's children.
Right. And that's, so that's the new thing of we give our child a choice. Like, I don't want to brush my teeth. Okay, here are your choices. If you choose not to brush your teeth, we're going to have to take all sweets and sugar out of your diet and what you eat, because that's what rots your teeth. And you can just not have that. And then, you don't have to brush your teeth, or you can brush your teeth. Of course, they always run to the bathroom because wait, what do you mean no more sugar?
It's funny, we have a story like that in our second book called What Do You Say? And the family had just a family rule that if you don't brush your teeth today, you don't get sweets tomorrow, right? And so it doesn't become this apocalyptic standoff, right? But if and you explain why, right? That you're getting rid of the bad little germs in your teeth and want to do bad things to your teeth. And so it's okay if you don't want to brush your teeth, it's fine. But tomorrow there'll be no sweets, right? Or whatever you agree with as a family. I love that. Do you want to brush your teeth before a story or after story? Do you want it before bath or after bath? And the thing that's important for folks to know is that there are huge individual differences, right? Some kids are just really easygoing and all right, and they kind of do what their parents ask of them or tell them to do. And other kids, particularly if you have a kid who kind of is prone to throw a tantrum, to recognize that that's a child, simply a child with a more sensitive stress response. So, particularly in your work, Francis, the folks who, many kids who end up with IEPs, who are differently wired, as Debbie Reber would say, who have ADHD or have, autism spectrum disorder or anxiety disorder, on and on and on. These are oftentimes kids who are just more sensitive, and for whom a sense of control and those choices that you just articulated so well are even more important. And it's a challenging balance, right? If you have a kid where learning or school or regulation or anything is hard, and they kind of they make messes and they blow up on us, and it makes us stressed out. And it's not always obvious that the kid who's misbehaving may actually obviously need structure and predictability in terms of discipline, but may actually be craving more choices and more control, which will make them more easygoing in how they interact with us or other people.
It makes so much sense, especially parenting younger children, which is similar, for teachers of, like, how do I get control of my class? Well, give them more control. Mm-hmm. Is always helpful. You have choices. Do we want to do playground before or after lunch, or
Mm-hmm. Do you know Sarah Moore? Do you know this name? So she's runs a website called Dandelion Parenting, and she's a peaceful parenting advocate. She's got a book, an expert rather. She has a book that just came out called Peaceful Discipline, which is kind of a nice follow-up to Positive Discipline. If great work of Dr. Jane Nelson. And so I was talking with Sarah, and so I love the line that Jane Nelson talks about with discipline of being kind but firm. And Sarah responded, she said, well, I love that too. She said, the way that I think about it, it's a slight twist on that, is kind but clear, and being really clear. And so when you have that family rule, if you don't brush your teeth, here's what happens. Those logical consequences are clearly articulated, particularly done in advance. Because when a kid when we drop the rule on a kid during the middle of a heated argument, they're not learning, right? Because when you know, what does Sarah say? If you don't feel emotionally safe, you can't learn, right? And so it's a challenge for educators to give kids as much choice as as can work with the structure of the class. But where it isn't mayhem, right? You know, and so I think a big part of that is giving these choices in a way that's really projected, really. It's planned out, you know. So guys, on Thursday we're going to, and the rules are articulated clearly in advance, and that way the learning is done. What's Bill's line? Strike when the iron is cold, right? We we impart these things when everyone's, you know, tranquilo. We're not doing this when everyone's spun up, because then we're probably not at our best, and our kids probably aren't either.
Right. And, you know, it reminds me of when I was a teacher, and the first week of school, one of the things we always did is talked with the children. What do you think good classroom rules are?
Oh,
So that the children came up with the classroom rules. It wasn't me giving them the rules. It was the kindergartners saying we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that, so that they felt that they were in charge somewhat.
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of parents who like, that's crazy, right? You know, it's really, you know, for a lot of parents, it just flies in the face of, you know, the adults can be in control. And again, we're not talking about, neither of us is talking about having a 4-year-old run the household, right? But the way that you're doing that, I can just picture that conversation, right? You're getting buy-in, right? And they feel a sense of ownership, right? That they're now holding themselves and even their classmates accountable to rules that they've collectively agreed to. And I imagine that you very deftly navigated them towards the very outcomes that you already imagined, because I'm sure you have those skills. But rather than just saying, here's what it is, you know, having that conversation, you know, it's just as powerful in parenting as it is in education.
Yes. And it's interesting you said the buy-in part, because I use that a lot with our older children with IEPs. Especially if they're getting identified older in middle school and high school. If they don't have a buy-in, it doesn't matter what we put on this piece of paper. That child is not doing anything we say. And so often the child's included, like, well, what do you want? What do you think will help? What type of schooling do you want? And then when they have that control, they buy in a lot quicker.
Oh, it's such a good point. I mean, there's a story that Bill tells about. So again, Bill's a clinical neuropsychologist, so is having a lot of these conversations more from a learning end than from some of the legal issues that you're so expert on. But you know, when kids are leaving 8th grade or they're switching, you know, do you want to repeat? What's the story? He said I did a lot of work with, I used to do a lot of therapy, and I'd be meeting with a 19 or 20-year-old, and so where are you in school? And they said, well, I'm a freshman in college, but I really should be a sophomore. My parents made me repeat 2nd grade. And it's like 8 years later, they're still pissed about it, right? And he said, when I would talk with a 5-year-old and say, listen, you know, it looks to me like some of the stuff in learning is harder for you than maybe it is for some other folks. So there's a choice. You know, you can repeat kindergarten again and just give your brain a chance to mature more. And this will all be easier with a more grown-up brain. Or, you know, you can push forward and go into 1st grade, but I think that some of these things are going to be hard for you. So let's talk about the pros and cons, right? You know, if you go into 1st grade, you may really need the help of a tutor to stay on top of stuff. But if you're repeat kindergarten, right? You know, some of the kids may, you know, tease you for being you're a dummy, you have to repeat. You know, so what do you think about this? And he said, with kindergartners, he said, when I would say it's going to be your call what you want to do, and your parents and I, we're going to support you. He said they'd think all summer about this, and they'd weigh the pros and cons on it, right? The children are because so much of motivation and, frankly, decision making is rooted in emotions, right? You know, Tony Damasio, right? You know, people who have damage to the emotional parts of their brain, they can't figure out what they want to do, what they want to have for breakfast, right? And so I love the way you describe this. When you ask kids, what do you want to do? They figure out what they want, what they feel, and then you get to all the rational. Okay, what are the things we actually need to put in place here? What's the help you need from me, or from mom, or from a tutor, or from a teacher? And it applies. And the beautiful thing, of course, is these tools apply not just to kids, you know, who have 504s and IEPs, but any kid, right? You know, they're going to have challenges, and we want them to be open to our advice and our influence. Because we as parents, we have a lot to say and a lot of wisdom to share, including our own foolish choices from our childhood. And when we ask that in a way that we get their buy-in and they don't feel like they're being forced, we don't get that defensive reaction. And we're actually talking, prefrontal cortex to prefrontal cortex. It's much better conversations.
I can imagine, definitely. And that's one way parents can help kids is by giving them the choices and letting them buy in. Or do you have any other pointers on how parents can help kids that are, having a little bit difficulties with learning and struggling a little?
So generally, we have a chapter in the Self-Driven Child, the second chapter of the book has the title of "I Love You Too Much to Fight With You About Your Homework." Okay? And it was born out of experiences that Bill had happened, and this will resonate with a lot of people, I suppose, where he talked with parents and say, I dread dinner because after that it's 3 hours of trying to get my kid to do the homework and on and on and on. And Bill and I both used this a kind of therapeutic technique. I did this with a girl who was in 9th grade. And I was the umpteenth executive function coach. And so I asked this girl, I said, if you don't hand in your homework or something doesn't go, or you don't put your time in, who's most upset? And she said, well, my mom. I said, okay, so here's the technique. Well, after your mom, who's most upset? My dad. Okay. Well, after your mom and after dad, who's most upset? Probably my teacher, yeah. Okay, so after mom and your dad and your teacher, my therapist, then my brother, he's always so annoying, he's up in business. And I said, where are you on this list? And she said, I'm nowhere on this list, right? And so she felt, because when we as adults put 80 units of energy trying to get kids to do 20, when we try 80 units of energy trying to get them to do work, they'll do 20. When we get intense and go to 90, they go to 10. And so what we suggest in this chapter of I Love You Too Much to Fight With You About Your Homework is that we take the position of thinking about ourselves as consultants. We're learning consultants, we're parenting consultants. And the implications of this are 3 things. 1, we offer advice, we offer help. I don't say, well, let me help you with this. You say, would you like my help with that? Let me show you how to do this. Would it be helpful if I walked you through an example or two so you see how I approach it? Because when we give them that control, again, the stress system, the stress response comes down in the prefrontal cortex, all this decision-making, problem-solving, emotional flexibility tools come back online. The second thing, the one you already mentioned, is we let kids make their own decisions as much as they can, because they have to have practice making decisions, including suboptimal ones, right? Because it's a tool, and you don't want a kid to go off to college with hopes and dreams, a suitcase full of your money, if they haven't had experience making decisions, right? And the third is that we let kids, as much as they can, solve their own problems. And again, when they make bad decisions or things blow up or fight with a teacher, they get kicked out of the soccer team, or they don't get invited to a play date, and they're super upset. And we react as well. Well, I'll call up Tommy's mom. I'll talk to the teacher. And we want to ask ourselves respectfully, whose problem is it? And it feels like, what do you mean? Of course it's my problem. I'm the parent. Well, no, not really. This is a problem for your child. That they're upset is your problem, is a problem for you. But the problem of soccer or a friend or D- on math, that's their problem. And we want to support them and help them figure out ways to solve that problem for themselves, because, and this goes back to the stress response, the way that we develop coping skills is to have an adverse experience and then be able to do something that makes it better. If someone else sweeps in and solves it for us, we never get the neurological wiring of coping. I'm forever a damsel in distress and looking to the sky for someone with a cape to save me. And so again, this idea of being a consultant is so important, and particularly important for kids who are 2E, for kids who are neurodiverse, for kids who are learning is hard, for kids who are emotional things are hard, because they need a ton more support. If things are harder for them, of course they need more support, and that's what you're going to do as a great educator, as a loving parent. But the how of it is so important, because we want to do everything for them to have the growing sense that they can make important decisions about themselves, that they can take advice or leave it, right? That they can solve their own problems. Because if the kid who feels like their success is always about someone else, I had a client who worked with one of my colleagues as a college counselor. During the middle of the college process, and the kid turned and said to his parent, he said, I worry that if I get into college, it'll be because of you. And if I don't get in, it'll be because of me. And what a lose-lose situation, right? So this idea of being a parent consultant, I like it a lot because I think it frames things up really well. So we're not just saying, hey, it's your problem, buddy. We're saying it's your problem, but how can I help?
I love that. And it brings me back thinking about IEPs and how this
Mhm.
relates. And in social emotional behavior, it is so difficult sometimes to come up with appropriate goals that
Mhm.
work. And I'm thinking like, well, that's what the goals need to be. We'll develop a list of coping skills, a list of 5 coping skills. And then
Yep.
the next
Yep.
objective can be, we'll use the coping skills to teach our children how to develop. Not that, they'll use their flash pass, they'll go to the counselor, because that's us solving the problem.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Bill's line is that, that our job as parents and educators is to help kids learn to develop the ability to run their own lives, right? And so if you've got a kid, who's ASD and so very sensitive to emotional context, right? It may be that they need a hall pass so they can step out and walk around and go to all 3 water fountains and calm themselves down and come back, right? And learning that is a really important tool because when they're in situations, with fights with a friend, right, or relationships going forward, they may say, Ned, I want to have this conversation, but I'm reacting really strongly toward you. So I need 5 minutes to walk around the block and then we'll have this conversation. Actually, I need to do this frankly often as well, right? And you're developing those coping skills, right? And it's just, I mean, what is childhood and adolescence? But learning the tools, learning about yourself and the world and the tools to help you navigate the adult world that you're ideally growing into.
Yeah, I know it brings me to when my husband and I like dealing with our children. As I said, they're a little strong-willed. And when I get to that point of frustration that I like just can't, I just say to my husband, I'm like, Seth, I'm tapping out. And,
Mm-hmm.
and he knows what that means and he steps in and he'll do the same thing because it's just when I get to that point and I know it, I'm at that point, this is not going to end well. So if
Right.
I step away, give, the time to do it. And if my husband's not there, take the 10 minutes I need to breathe, to bring myself back down again, and then interact with the
It's
child.
so important, and I wish that my kids are 18 and almost 21, and I wish that I had known when the things that I think I know now when my kids were your age, because invariably what happens when we make mistakes as parents, right? Our kids do something that, is not what we wish for them to be doing, right? And we get upset. And then when we're trying to discipline, when we're upset, let's go back to Sarah's point, they can't learn when they're emotionally fraught. And if we're emotionally fraught, they'll be emotionally fraught because emotions are contagious, right?
Yeah.
And so what I wish that I had done is model for them, for myself, the idea of a timeout. Not you go sit in the corner and think about this. Kiddo, I need a timeout for like 3 minutes because I'm about to lose my cool, and that's not going to help you, and it's not helping me either. So let me just give me about 3 minutes, and I'll come back. And I'll never forget. There's this actually story that's in our book. What do you say? I was having a conversation with my daughter about exercise and the reasons for why exercise. It was a big conversation, and we'd had this agreement, and she was not going along with what our agreement was. And she was very frustrated with me, and I was I don't know who got frustrated first, but collectively we were frustrated. And I was about to blow my top and say something that would have been wildly unproductive. And I'm like, you know what? And I'm sort of tapped out, and I didn't do it in a particularly elegant way. I'm going for a run. This is where it gets great. So I like to run, but I don't have a good sense of direction. I was running
That's like
in the
me.
woods. Oh man, and I got lost, and my 2-mile run ended up being a 12-mile run. It was long, very sore knees. Here's the great thing: I come back, all the venom in my, all the energy of my nervous system was just gone, because this is what exercise can do for you. And with my intense energy now gone, my daughter had equilibrated and came around to the idea of like, okay, maybe I'll go do the exercise thing, whatever it was we've been talking about. And she had gone off for 20 minutes of exercise when I'd gone off for 12-mile run, right? Because I wasn't there. And so this timeout is really valuable. And it gets to a point, that we had, another point we're talking a little bit about is this idea of, we describe the follow-up chapter 2, the parent as a consultant, is a chapter that we call a non-anxious presence.
Okay.
And we borrowed this idea of a non-anxious presence from a guy named Edwin Friedman. He was a rabbi, he was a consultant, and he made the point that things go better when the people or person or people who are in charge are not overly emotional, right? So you have families who come to you and it's a hot mess at school and this kid is not getting the support and parents are just kind of out of their minds, like they're frustrated, everyone's frustrated and upset. And you, because you know stuff and have walked this walk with lots of parents, can sit there and say, well, then it's a great point. And I am really frustrated for how, what's going on with your school. And you can start downing down the energy. For what it's worth, I've gone through this a lot, and I'm pretty confident that this is good, that I'm going to be able to help you find some solutions that you haven't found yet. And so where you currently are feeling stuck with your kid at school, that's not where I would be really surprised if that's where we ended up 3 months from here. And so what I've tried to do as I talk is try to bring my own energy down, right? In the same way that if you go to a doctor, like, right, that's not the person you want to talk to. Where if they sit and say, yeah, this is hard. These were not the results that you and I were hoping for. But I'm confident there are a lot of arrows in our quiver, and there are a lot of things we're going to do. And I'm confident that we're really going to be able to help you, even though this is really hard. And the idea behind this is that all emotions are contagious. Stress is wildly contagious. You can just walk into a room where something bad has gone down before. You have no idea, and you smell it in people's sweat. You can read it on their faces. You can feel it, and you're like, what's going on? The great part is that calm is also contagious. Calm is contagious, turns out, is a mantra of the Navy SEALs. And so just as you described with your kiddo, right, when you're like, I need to, and you step away and you calm yourself down and you come back in the situation with different energy, you can then become, all of us as parents can then become a stress sponge, right, and pull the stress out of our kids so they can then think better. Now, some people, I'll say, if I may make a couple suggestions, that some folks are to find this easier, right? And some people are just more excitable, right? I have to work really hard at this to walk that walk. But three pieces of advice that we suggest in the book. The first is that we take the long view, because almost all of our fears about our kids are about the future, right? It's not just that they didn't get invited to this one party, but you're worried that they won't have any friends the rest of the year, right? This was their best friend, and how could they not invite them, right? For a kid who's really struggling in education, think, oh my gosh, my kid's a D student. Are they going to have a D life? And it breaks your heart, right? But when we can have confidence that these are struggles that they're going through for now. And, there's a reason why I call them growing pains, right? And if you can have confidence that despite these learning problems or despite these behavioral issues or whatever the problems are, you can have confidence that these things can get better over time. It makes it a lot easier for our kids to believe that things will get better over time and to do the hard work that they need to get to get better in school or friends or whatever over time, as opposed to avoiding it, right? The second thing is that do everything you can as a parent to just treat your kid like they're a joy-creating organism, right? I mean, you still have little guys who are like, oh my God, it's so good, right? We don't often have that energy with teens, especially if school's a mess, right? And we feel like we're somehow bad parents. We don't put all of our energy into the thing that isn't going well. Well, paradoxically, if you sort of set aside the thing that's not going well and just remind yourself, I love this kid. You're just the coolest human. School's kind of a total disaster, but you are a great person, right? And I love spending time with you. And when we change the energy that way, we're back to the stress response. We're back to the amygdala, right? It calms down the amygdala just to feel like I'm a joy. My parents love me just for me, not for the grades or whatever the car I just crashed, right? And it makes it much more likely that kids can get back on the path that they want to be, and we want them to be, right? And developing themselves. And the last thing in terms of being a non-anxious presence is this. The way that I think about this is that if the inflows of stress into you as a person or you as a family or a school or a community, or in this case, the whole bloody country, are not world, really with COVID, right? If those things, or those inflows of stress are not balanced by healthy outflows of stress, all kinds of bad things happen, right? We've seen all the misbehavior and fights and whatnot at school and school boards, right? And domestic violence during COVID and substance use and all of it just going through the roof. And these are predictable bad behaviors and bad outcomes when we have too much stress in us. And so if you don't yet have either really good coping skills, as you mentioned before, Francis, or have ways to really pull stress out of your nervous system, you simply can't be as effective as you want to be, right? So I may be one of the most well-rested people in all of DC. I had a very difficult childhood. My father's an alcoholic, my mother's institutionalized. I was for 3 months in a pediatric psychiatric hospital. So I have a nervous system that's wired to be depressed. I don't like being depressed. So I sleep really well every night. I exercise every day, and I practice a type of meditation called transcendental meditation twice a day. And if I do those things, I can handle anybody's foolishness. And if I don't, it's a wreck. And so if you feel like, to your point, I'm tapping out, but if you feel like you need to tap out every 10 minutes, then you may want to think about what are some of the tools, because chances are you're overreacting because you're up to here with everything, right? And what we need to do is bring it down to here with everything, so you have a little bit of bandwidth.
Yeah. So three things jumped out at me. First of all, the timeout. I love that because as a teacher, we always use timeout as a punishment. You did something wrong, you need to time out.
Yep.
And that's not what it is.
Right.
It's you need to take 3 minutes to think about what just went on, and then we'll process it.
Yeah.
Right?
Or even and add one more to those, you deserve 3 minutes to not have this conversation, because I can see you're pretty upset about this too. You deserve 3 minutes, 5 minutes just to step away from me in this conversation and the kid who just threw a shoe at you. Or whatever. And so to your point, if we teach this as, if we teach this as a tool for regaining our composure as opposed to a punishment, you go think about that. No kid ever went in the corner and thought the thoughts that you want them to have ever. My teacher's a jerk. My dad sucks, as opposed to, in hindsight, I really should have been more thoughtful to my life. Nobody in the history of childhood has ever done that.
So true. And then you were bringing up about how families come to me and it's so stressful, which is how the name Stress-Free IEP came up. That's kind of been my tagline for a long time now. And
I love that.
Thank you. Clients always ask me, what should I do at the meeting? What can I say? What what should I not do? And I always tell them, you're the parent. Be the parent. Say what you want. Do what you want. It's okay. That's why you have me here. There's nothing you can say as a parent in an IEP meeting that I can't turn around and say, what my client is trying to say is, and then I put it in the words that we need it to get the school to agree with us.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
It just, and I see the parents go, oh, okay. And them get calm.
Yeah, because you've taken away the fear, right? If I don't say the right thing, I'm going to screw up my kid's entire school experience, right? That's intense, right? And they're already stressed out, probably because they're asking for your help because things are already not going well. And I love that you say, look, you don't have to worry about this. I basically, and maybe they're not the words, but you don't have to worry about this. I will worry about it for you, right? Yep. And I'll make sure that we land this plane. I love that.
Yep, I take it. And then the third thing, which was a while ago, you were talking about homework and the struggles of homework. And that's actually been a very hot topic lately at IEP meetings, in the sense of the child coming home with homework and the parents are spending 3 hours on it. And most of the teachers, when it's been brought up at the IEP meeting, most of the teachers will say, 20 minutes. That's all you need to spend on it. Because how is this healthy for a child after 6 hours in a classroom and then 3 hours with mom fighting, and then they're going to go to bed and they've had no downtime?
It's completely right. I was given a talk at a local public school here, and the mom came up to me. We were to talk about our second book, and she said, I bought The Self-Driven Child right at the start of COVID. And she said, I pledge, when we have this chapter about a non-anxious presence, one of the goals is every chapter ends with what to do tonight. And one of the things with what to do tonight is to try to make home feel like a safe base. And she said, I pledged at the start of COVID when everything was intense and Zoom school, I mean, ugh. And she said, I pledged that I was going to make home be a safe base because everything in the world felt like you're going to die, right? And she said, it completely transformed my relationship with my son. Right. And we want that. I mean, because so many kids, school's hard and then they come home and they get laid on by mom and dad. It's like, where do I ever catch a break? Where do I ever catch my breath? Right. And this is really important for folks to know. The major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. And so the more stressed out we make kids feel about this or that thing, the more they naturally want to avoid it. And we spend all this energy trying to talk kids into doing things that they want to avoid. My daughter, who's this really cool kid, super bright, autism spectrum disorder, literally diagnosed 2 months ago, and she had a very subtle presentation of this. And I will never forget this. She was in 10th grade, so middle of COVID. And she has this Latin assignment. Now, my daughter has at least 20 IQ points. I mean, she's a super sharp kid. So Latin for her is super easy because she just has the brain for it. And this is important. My wife teaches Latin at another school. So my daughter comes up like, this is impossible. I can't do this, and blah, 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 blah. And my wife and I both looking at each other like, really? Right? And my wife sadly, foolishly takes the bait. And she starts trying to tell my daughter, well, of course you can. And you know this and da-da-da-da, and you're so great at this, right? But that's really invalidating, right? It really, you shouldn't be feeling the way that you feel. Or, well, I can help you and I can do this and da-da-da. And basically saying, if only you'd be doing it this way, you wouldn't be aware of the problem situation you feel yourself. And so, as one can predict, my daughter just made her more mad. And so I waited about 10 minutes and I came around later and said, what exactly is the assignment? It's really easy for me to act dumb because I don't know anything about that. What's this about? She's like, well, stupid this and that and da-da-da. And I said, yeah, that does sound stupid. And like, well, tell me more. And just keep asking these questions. And I just validate whatever she says. And then I have her buy-in. I said, can I make a suggestion? And she says, yeah. I said, what if we just make a cartoon out of this? And she said, what? And I just come up with just the most cockamamie, just absurd suggestion to me that no educator think it's a good idea. And she's like, oh, that's good. And she goes off and she makes this crazy picture, right? Just basically sort of, giving a finger to this whole project, though she likes her teacher. And it calms her down. And then about 15 minutes later, she sits down and she does the homework in 10 minutes because she's got the super fast brain. And I thought, we could have spent an hour trying to talk her into it, and it wouldn't have worked. And so I encourage parents, if they're fighting with the kids about their homework, drop the rope. Read this chapter. I love you too much to fight up your homework. And say, look, kiddo, I couldn't make you do your homework. You'd be like flat on the ground, go, la, la, what are you, duct tape each other? I couldn't make you do your homework. And you know what? I'm not going to try because it's your work. It would be disrespectful of me to act like it's my job to get you to do your homework. It's your homework. And if you feel like there's benefit to it, I'll help you any way I can. And if you feel like it's a colossal waste of your time and there's no reason you want to do this, I get it, because this is your education. And it completely changes the energy. It completely changed the energy because kids don't want to go to school unprepared. It's just that they're up to here with homework and they're so upset. And this is important as well. For every kid, this is my take on it. Every kid who ever said, this is stupid, probably 10% of the time, this is stupid. And probably 90% of the time is what they're saying is, it makes me feel stupid.
Interesting.
It makes me feel stupid. And so, of course, you don't want to do something that really is threatening to your ego, because for kids, we're learning this hard all day long. They feel, I'm not saying all of them, but it's so easy for them to feel that they're dumb, that they're less than, that they're a source of frustration for their teachers, right? And a source of derision for their classmates, right? And when they get piled on at home by mom and dad. And so I encourage people to try this, because you want to work with your kids. You don't want to work on them, right? And we have to change our energy. We change our dance steps, and that helps kids change their dance steps, rather than trying to talk kids into doing things that they're so naturally frustrated by or fearful about doing. And again, Bill has spent a lifetime working with kids where learning's hard and motivation's hard and self-regulation is hard. And he said, I've walked this walk. He said, I walked this walk with my own son. And it just works because the great part about all of the advice, this stuff, it's based on neuroscience. It's based on how brains work, right? And we want to increase kids' internal motivation and want to decrease their internal stress, because we want kids to work hard at developing themselves in school, because it's important for the lives they're trying to build.
It's fascinating. It's like I'm sitting here going, okay, wait, he gave me this and he gave me that, and so much information, which is wonderful, and I love it as a parent. Do you have something for the viewers, a summary kind of to help?
Yeah. So I thank you for asking that. So we have two things I can say. We have we Bill and I sat together and wrote top 10 tips from the self-driven child, and the top 10 tips from our second book called What Do You Say, which has a wonderful subtitle in my view: How to Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. And so so we'll share these with folks. The books are robust, that they have all of these conversations and kind of what people would normally say, what you mean to say, what you might say instead. And so I think there are a lot of other ways to spend $16 that won't be nearly as useful. But these top tips are a great place to start. You can just put them on your mirror in your bathroom and remind yourself about some of these things, because parenting's hard. Parenting is hard. There's just no way around it. And starting with COVID, if the last coming up on 3 years now have not been the hardest time to parent in probably the history of parenthood, I don't know when would be, because obviously the Second War was hard and the Great Depression was hard. But has there ever been a time when literally the entire world was stressed out?
Right.
So it's hard. And your kids are much younger than my kids, and particularly for parents who are trying to figure this out, right? Give yourself some grace, give your kids some grace. It's always been hard. And these last few years have been particularly tough. And so ideally, so there are at least one thing on these tips that we'll share, because if you're trying to do better, what you may just need are some other tools in your parenting toolbox. So hopefully people will make some good use of this stuff, because you want your kids to do well and you want them to be happy. Aha.
Right. And I love that. We're going to put the link to that in the show notes, definitely, wherever you're watching this. This has been so awesome. And I'm like trying to remember everything. And I'm definitely going to go get those 10 tips and have my husband read them.
Yeah.
Because he's not going to read a book. I'm not going to read a book. That's a great book to read. And it sits on the shelf with all the rest of the books.
Well, I'll tell you, there's something that's kind of fun. The Self-Driven Child is fun. I love every time we go to book talks and we'll see people have like 140 little sticky notes in there. It's long, but it's pretty breezy getting through it. And the other thing I'll say is the Self-Driven Child has this kind of cliff notes, and at the end of every chapter ends with a one-page thing that says, what to do tonight. What to do tonight, right?
That's awesome.
And the reason that I like the what do you say is we wrote this because our agent said, we've sold 150,000 books in the US. We've sold 1 million copies of this book in China.
Wow.
Okay. The second book is all about the language of what do you say, because we use the language that we inherited from our culture, from our parents, from the world around us, right? And sometimes it's really effective, and sometimes it's really not effective, right? There's a wonderful chapter in there about getting kids unstuck. It's based on what's called motivational interviewing, and it's so cool. And what the book does is give you these tips. Will give you all the points that you want to know. But what the what do you say does? It gives you a script of, in this situation, try this. Literally, try this conversation. And it's so fun, because some of these I help write, and some of these I picked up from Bill, like, oh, that's so good. And I literally have taken these things and applied them and watched people, like, their energy turn. It feels a little bit like, what is it in Star Wars? Like, these are not the droids you're looking for. These are not the droids you're looking for, right? And you try this, right? I had a mom read the book, What Do You Say? And she said, does this work on husbands too? And I'm like, oh yeah, it does. Oh yeah, it does. Because this is it's human neuroscience, and it's human psychology. So absolutely start. I hope the tips are like a gateway drug to get you to the books, because there's good stuff in there. But
that is awesome. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. This has been so awesome having you on my show. I know I've learned a lot. I hope my listeners have learned a lot. We're definitely going to have your information in the show notes. Is there anybody else, like any experts that you want to shout out to, that you think might be good guests on the show even?
Yeah, so there's a woman named Debbie Rebrand, who wrote a really cool book called Wired Differently. And she talks about her son, who was very ASD in ways that were very disabling for 3 schools in a year of his life. Very complicated kid. Wonderful book, wonderful research. She's written a bunch of books, but Differently Wired is my favorite book of hers. And there's a woman named Janine Halloran, who wrote a book called Coping Skills for Kids and a second book called Coping Skills for Teens. And they're both they're wonderful educators, they're wonderful parents, they're wonderful people. I mean, the list is enormous, and I got all these things over here on the bookshelf, but those are 2 people who are currently kind of top of mind for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will definitely reach out to them and see if they want to be on the show.
Thank
you for being on the show and sharing all of your words of wisdom. And I hope lots of people go get those top 10 tips, because I think it's really going to be helpful and change their lives.
Well, thanks, Francis. I love the work that you do, because again, parenting is not easy. Navigating kids through school isn't either. And for parents of kids who are learning is hard. They just need more help, and boy, are you a source of wisdom to them to help parents help their kids go through this process of school. So thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Stress-Free IEP with your host, Francis Shefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Francis through shefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.